All right. So let's see. The first question I had here for you is so in our class we've been talking a lot about conceptual thinking, and I loosely describe it, or had described it, or just defined it as disparate or otherwise unexpected visual elements brought together to communicate an idea or tell a story. And I was talking to uh, a friend who is in advertising, and I think he even did a better job, because what he said was he saw it as the intersection between the familiar and the unexpected. Thought that was kind of an interesting inclusion. But anyway, would you agree with this definition or either of these definitions? And how might you change, refine, or improve those definitions?
No, I think they both work. I think his is more concise, and I do think. Well, let me back up. I teach um, every first class in junior year, whether it's illustration or graphic design. They have to do 100 visual cliches, and they have to do it in 20 minutes, which is just me being cruel because, of course, nobody does it in 20 minutes, but I get to torture them.
Uh-huh.
But it all begins there. It's the known that is our visual language, and then concept grows out of um, changing that, altering that somehow, altering the perception of that.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's the known and then the unknown, right? Or the surprise,
Right.
where I think concept works. But you have to be able to draw people in somehow. So if it's too obscure, uh, then it's harder to get people to react to it.
Right. So it's like, you need to speak at least the language of the audience. You need
Right,
to be speaking in the language of the audience, or otherwise you're just too obscure.
right.
Actually, it's funny because I recently revisited an interview that we had done before, and you described it this way, and I thought this was a really poetic way to put it. You said it was the gift of the designer to the viewer.
Right.
I really like that. The
Yeah.
gift
No,
of
I
the
think
designer
that's
to the
true
viewer.
because it's that aha moment, and you may not laugh out loud if you're using humor, but you still sort of laugh inside.
Mhm.
Um, we did a critique of Time magazine covers today in my general illustration one class, and one student held something up to present, and I instantly just laughed out loud. And
Because it was well done.
because it was well done and it was funny.
Uh-huh.
It was both. It was
Because
it real.
students can make you laugh for all kinds of reasons.
Yeah, no, this was
It could have been lousy and you just laughed
yeah,
about it.
no, it was really good and it was really funny. And I just said, well, you've already won me over because you made me laugh.
Uh-huh.
It's hard. It's hard in what we do to make people laugh out loud.
And with given the amount of time that we actually have to attract their attention and keep it. uh,
Right,
right.
right, yeah,
um okay, so I have chosen, and the students have seen these images already.
right.
I chose two of your creative thinking posters. Can you describe what they were and why they were produced?
Okay, so when I went to Kane University in 2004 as full-time faculty, they started a Thinking Creatively conference that was held at the university, and they would have speakers, big names. They would have speakers come in from the industry and hold workshops. And I don't remember if I was offered or I just glommed onto it, but I know that I probably just grabbed the opportunity to design a poster
Yeah.
and then ephemera for the conference every year. And my goal was to reinvent it every year. there. So I think I did 7 in all, and each one was different.
Yeah.
And so that was my challenge to myself.
Okay.
And so if you look at all of them, they have nothing in common other than the conference itself. And that was just me pushing myself to, reinvent it every year. Sometimes more successfully than others, but it was a great creative challenge.
So I find that really interesting, and I think it's a point. It's an important point. With a creative who's had as a illustrious a career as you have had, you still seek out things that attract your attention to do as projects.
Oh, sure. I still,
Uh-huh.
I
You,
mean,
you
these
could have,
days,
you might have been able to find a student or something to do those for you, or you could have found something else, but you chose to take this on as a design uh, problem solving project.
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I would have student assistants on some, not on, mostly like on the program books and things like that. I would have assistants, but not the
You took
concept.
the poster, right?
Oh, I always took the poster. You always take the poster.
Right, right.
If you
Um,
give a talk anywhere, the first thing you ask is after, they'll tell you whether there's pay or not, but then you say, can I do a poster?
remember that. Remember that, students. That's important. Okay, so the home kit, like I love that poster. So where did you come up with the idea of a home kit? And do you remember what made you think of it? How was it related? Like it's a perfect example of that unexpected. Like how did a home kit? Where did that come from?
Well, the first concept is that it folds into a box,
Right.
and you can actually cut up the
That-
poster and fold it
It's
down.
interactive. It's
And,
interactive.
yeah, and we had them at the conference. We had these boxes. So,
So they
there's,
actually so they had them constructed
yeah,
as well. Very cool.
yeah. And, uh, so there you go. It's a cliche thinking outside the box, right? I mean, that was the birth of the idea. And then I just thought it was, humorous to think about being, having a kit to help you be creative.
Right.
I've explored those concepts before. We did before I was at Print Magazine, but I was freelancing. I did the cover to the parody issue, and inside I did. Um, I don't remember exactly what they were, but I sort of did like home kits for creativity based on a different designers' work or artists' work.
Uh-huh.
Um, and so I
So
guess
that
that's
was
always,
still sort of somewhere in the back of your mind.
yeah, and it's always amused me somehow. I
Do that too.
also,
I have to admit, sometimes I'll have an idea that I'm just waiting to find the right thing for it to work with, you know.
right.
And sometimes it's like trying to put a square peg in a round hole. You're like, oh, please fit, but you can't do that.
Well, you never throw out ideas.
Right.
You
Right.
know, that at some point you're going to need them or use them.
And so I would doubt that you had in mind, and probably any designer or illustrator or creative has in mind, must be familiar, must be unexpected. But the idea of, these sort of kits, I mean, that's the familiar. That's what we are
Yeah,
accustomed to. We know what that is. How
yeah.
that relates to, a creative thinking um, conference, that's the that's the unexpected, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
So I love that. I love that particular one. So how many ideas did you play with before that one was like, okay, I'm gonna go with this?
Okay, so this is not advice, and it's somewhat embarrassing. And I tell my students to do exactly the opposite, but I've always been able to conceive of something like in one shot, and
Really?
it's fully realized, and then I just have to get it down on paper. I don't know why that is. It's just the way my brain works.
Uh-huh.
So like all my posters, all my book covers, they all like I can visualize the poster before I set pen to paper or before I turn on the computer.
Fully
Uh,
realized. You don't have to play with it. You don't have to sketch it out, do derivations on the sketch.
yeah, I mean, when I worked for other people, of course, I would do thumbnails. Um,
Well, that was going to be my next question. So how did you get away with that when you were working for others who would expect more than just one idea?
yeah, there I would not. And although I always hated that, and that's terrible advice.
Well, there's always, I mean, that's the issue with having to come up with more than, five or, whatever sketches, concepts, because there's always the chance they're going to choose one that's not your favorite. And
Right.
I feel like that's kind of the perennial dilemma is in presenting, learning how to present that has some sort of psychological emphasis to it so that you can keep keep their focus on what you want them to choose, which
Yeah,
is arguably always the best idea.
right. Yeah. Well, you should never show something you don't like. That's important because they'll always pick that one. I mean,
But there are nuances to, liking like just ecstatically.
right,
And then, yeah, I could do it. I mean, that's great, but the ecstatic one's the one.
right. Yeah, yeah. But in the case of these posters for Kane, I didn't need approval. I was just given carte blanche. I was hired, to teach because of my career, and I think they were happy to have me doing the posters, and so I would show them uh, to Rose is the director. Um, I don't know what her Rose Ganella. I'm not sure what her title is now. I'd show, it'd be a fait accompli by the time I showed it to her, and she would just love it. Um, I can tell you a really funny story about one of the posters. It's not one of the ones that you picked, but there's one, and it's on a yellow background. It's a silk screen, and it says "Thinking Creatively," and the type is reductive, like in a Herb Luke Allen way, so that the first stroke of the N also doubles as the I.
Okay.
So it's thinking with no I's, but with two dots over this first stroke of the N.
Could you send it to me so I could show the students and we
Oh,
could.
sure,
Great.
sure, absolutely. Um, and I had it laying out on um, on the table. I had just designed it, and I was pretty pleased with it. And I knew it was going to be silkscreen, and it was beautifully silkscreen. And Ray Cruz, who taught there and taught typography,
The
do you know?
typographer.
Yeah, wonderful, amazing typographer. Um, and he walked in and he saw it lying there, and he shook his head and he said, "No." And I said, "What's wrong?" He said, "The dots are in the wrong place." And I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "They need to be moved to the left a little bit. They're not sitting over the N correctly." And I said, "Really? How much?" He said, "Well, you know what? Why don't you email it to me tonight, and I'll adjust it and send it back to you." And so I get home that night, and go on. And Ray, are you there? And yeah, he's there. And I send it to him. I send him the file, and in like less than a minute, I get the file back, and I look at it, and it looks perfect. And then I measure it, and he moved the dots the 64th of an inch to the left.
Typographer. Well, a designer. That's,
Yeah, and he was right.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
please send me that one.
I will,
That would be wonderful to see.
definitely.
So with the model kit one or the home kit one, I'm curious. So like, there's the point at which you conceive of the idea and you draw it out. Let's say you draw it out. Maybe you didn't because you say it was pretty fully realized. At what point do you start making decisions about what the actual graphic aesthetic will be? What will the colors look like? What will the line width be? What will the letter forms be? You know, what typeface will you
Right. Yeah, well, type is always the big challenge. You know, you want the type to look really good. So I think that one I conceived of, but then I did find a template on how to fold the box.
Uh-huh.
So that was the starting off point. And then everything else sort of falls into place. I actually haven't looked at that one in a while. I know I played with the thinking logo a little bit. But I wanted it sort of, as I recall, to look a little bit cheesy, like, you know, advertising,
Yeah,
right?
right.
That was part of the thinking behind it. Is that
But it's not cheesy. I mean, you can see that there is, so that's what I find interesting is that being there might have been the inspiration or the influence of like, let's make this a little garish or a little over the top in terms of like where the inspiration came from. But when it comes out, it's done very elegantly and very well designerly. Uh, you get the reference, but you don't make an ugly garish poster.
right, right, yeah.
So like these decisions are, do you are any of these decisions the kind of things you learn that you get better at as you grow, or that you just have to have a knack for?
Oh no, I think you learned that. That I think you learned. I look back at I mean, some of my early work is really good, and some of it's just awful. And so, you know, I think the longer you're at it, and the more sensitive you become to to especially typography. Unlike concept, type did not come naturally to me. I really had to work at it and study it.
Hmm.
And, you know, I think it takes a while. I don't think, um, I think that takes some years to really like, you know, and color and aesthetics and all that. I think that takes a while to gel.
Right. Um, okay, great. So let me just go on to the next question here. Um, okay, so was there a process of revision making that took place from the original idea to the final piece?
No, the only revision on all the Thinking Creatively posters was Ray's moving the two dots, the 64th of an inch.
Uh,
That's
Now I kind of wish I would have picked something that wasn't that you didn't where you didn't have quite as much where there was a little more push and pull with maybe an editor or a
right,
director or something like that.
right.
But so you could, yeah, yeah. Um, so okay, then let's see what my next question here is. So once you had the concept solidified, um, after you had the concept solidified, how did you decide? I already asked that. How the visual style would be represented. Okay, so so that's the home kit poster. The next one I wanted to talk to you about was the Blood, Sweat, and Tears poster, which I also think is an amazing example of conceptual thinking. And there are some similarities between this one, but and the home kit, but also some significant differences, which I'll get into. But so where did the Blood, Sweat, and Tears? Where did that idea come from? Do you remember what made you think of it, and how was it related to creative thinking?
Yeah, yeah, that one sort of still near and dear to my heart. And so the most common visual cliche for creativity is light bulb.
Mhm.
And it just used by itself to represent creativity is is like a ridiculous cliche.
It's like the dollar sign for money
Yeah, yes, it is.
or a skull for death.
Yeah, yeah. And so uh, that was my starting off point. But what I was amusing myself, and so but I was actually making a statement because I had just left print after 5 years of working a full-time job. But not only that, I had just left working in Manhattan for 17 years.
Which is how we met.
Yeah, yeah. And so that included two full-time jobs, one that ran 8 years, print was 5 years, and then going into Pushpin for another 5 years. So I was commuting in every day, and I was working full days. I was working into the night because you do work, long hours in this field. And I was sort of burnt out. And then all of a sudden I was teaching full time, which was a completely different experience. And also not going into Manhattan every day by train for an hour and a half, an hour and a half. And so I was feeling that. I was feeling blood, sweat, and tears, and I thought it was amusing, for it to be the filaments of the light bulb. And then where does creativity come from? It comes from the crack, right? It's the crack in your psyche. That's where creativity comes from. So I just thought it was funny. I'll give you the background though. I had just recently, I don't know how much before, um, bought a GE General Electric catalog from the 1950s.
Hmm.
And so, which I love. The design is great. And in fact, for the program, we used that design. And so that's where that image came from.
Mhm.
But it was scanned out of the General Electric catalog.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So, so it was at once heartfelt and also like cracked me up. Like I just thought the crack in the light bulb was the funniest thing that I could come up with.
Right, right. So again, this idea of the familiar,
Yeah.
uh, potentially too familiar, right?
Yeah.
Uh, and I think it's interesting that you used that particular visual cliche, and then incorporated also blood, sweat, and tears, which suggests work.
Yeah.
I think so often people think of creative enterprises or creativity as this, oh, I just come up with ideas all the time, as if
Right.
there's no work.
Right.
It is hard work.
It's hard work and it's long hours. So
Right. I think Christoph Niemann, the designer and illustrator, said, it's like, do artists and designers ever have those like light bulb moments that create the aha moment for you?
right.
No, they they work hard at it, and they refine it, and they try to make you have the light bulb moment. It's
Right.
very interesting that
Yeah.
the creativity has come, and I think there's been a lot of mythologizing about that as well. That creativity does just come. It's been going on since the Renaissance, as if this takes no effort.
Right. Right. Well, I think people outside the field believe that because they don't understand it.
Right.
So they think, oh, you get to play all day.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is sometimes play, right? I mean, it's play in the way that, like, my 4-year-old son, I've been told that kids, like, their job is to play. They're
Right.
discovering, they're learning, they're learning to develop their imagination. And then later on, that effort that it takes to play for them becomes a kind of work ethic.
Right.
um, and I think it's there's similarities to it. If
Oh,
you're
absolutely.
doing something in life that is nothing but blood, sweat, and tears and pain, maybe do something else.
Yeah, I completely agree.
But so with those two posters, I see a couple of things really evident. First of all, that focus on simplicity and minimalism, like very much with the home kit. It's there in the it's in the poster center of the poster. There's to my mind only what you need to make it agreeable to your sensibilities, but
Right,
readable so that it's if you take any part out of that, it wouldn't work. I don't
right.
think you would be taking out an important part. Same going on with blood, sweat, and tears. Another thing though that I find is that, and this is a trend I'm starting to notice, and I didn't think of this until after we started talking, but this playing around with cliches. Uh, are you attracted to, I would say, the challenge of working with what others would call visual cliches,
I
and
think,
sort of
yeah,
reinvent them or do something that's different?
well, yes, but I think most work uses cliches. And, most successful work uses visual cliche in a new way, or combines it with another visual cliche so that all of a sudden it's something new.
Hmm.
I mean, the one that comes to mind is Milton Glazer's, I love New York.
Hmm.
I mean, there's not a bigger visual cliche than the heart.
In the heart, right?
And, for years I used to say in my history class that he was the first one to use the heart in graphic design to represent love. It's not true. I have found some earlier examples, but they're not as successful.
Hmm.
Uh, but he knew exactly what he was doing. And so he didn't come up with the phrase, the slogan that was given to him by the ad agency.
Hmm.
He was asked to design a logo for I Love New York. And he went right to that visual cliche, but it was in a brand new context at the
Hmm.
time. There was nothing like it. And now it's become its own cliche, the
Yeah,
whole thing,
right.
because it's so ubiquitous. It's everywhere, right? It's I love my Chihuahua, I love Tokyo, whatever you love, it's there.
Right.
And then I hate when people say I heart, Toyota or whatever it is.
But
But
he did a wonderful thing though. Then he took that cliche that he'd created and he made it interesting again with the I love New York more than ever,
yeah,
with a little burn.
yeah,
That that I like that one better than I Heart New York.
yeah, yeah. I did something similar for print for 9/11, and I did it. We were sending out the cover to the regional on, it was going to go out on Wednesday, and Tuesday was 9/11, and we just had the 20th anniversary. And so I took Milton's heart and scanned it in
Mhm.
because I knew it represented New York. And I did a cracked heart
Oh wow.
originating in the same place. And I did that before Milton, not before he did it, I don't know, but before I saw his came out a few days later, actually, in the Daily News. So it's the same thinking, but I was using his visual cliche to represent New York. So it's very conscious on my part. And so it in his case, with that I love New York, it carries more weight. Had I just created a heart and put a crack on it,
Right.
even with the same idea that it's originating, if the heart was Manhattan, it originates where we were, where the World Trade Center was. Um, it wouldn't have had the same resonance
Right.
um, as using his.
Did you ever talk to him about that? That you both had the same idea and it, you know?
I don't think we ever did. Maybe we did. It was so long ago. I mean, we certainly talked a lot about uh, what was happening at the time.
Yeah.
His represented his smudge mine represented a broken heart, right? His represented a heart attack, and it's interesting because he had recently had a heart attack.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
and so that's the other side of what we do is you just bring what your life is into it.
Sure.
Um, uh, yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I don't remember if we specifically did or not. Um, I'm not sure.
It's interesting because for years I felt, I don't know if I felt insecure about it or not, but I always was drawn to putting up like on my own walls, and I always found more interesting um, posters, graphics, things that were done by designers, illustrators, not fine artists,
Right,
and it often made me I don't know, it didn't make it just it seemed like why are you not more drawn to the fine arts, and because there's this I guess belief that may be changing, I don't know, that design and certainly advertising could never be art. But
right,
somebody recently suggested something new to me, this idea that, Toulouse-Lautrec's posters for the Moulin Rouge,
right.
they were just posters for the Moulin Rouge.
Yeah,
But but they are art, and they are
yeah,
regarded as such. So
right.
I'm curious to know if you have any thoughts on the reason why what prompts this question is that you mentioned, we bring our own lives into our work, and very personal stuff. Uh, and that's something that I think is more what people associate with fine artists or writers or something like that. Um, where do you think design and designers, advertisers, illustrators, where do they fall in terms of what could be art?
Well, I mean, there's the modernist theory that you don't do that, that you meet the client's needs, and that's it, right? And you're solving a problem for a client. And my favorite example of that is Paul Rand,
Mm,
because his work is so self-expressive, and yet he always said that you don't do that. And so um, I don't know about advertising. We've talked about this before because I haven't done much advertising, but um, for design and for for illustration, what would be the point if we weren't expressing ourselves?
right.
Then I mean, there would be nothing worse than for it just to be a job.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I think as artists, and I consider designers and illustrators artists, uh, it's all about self-expression. However, whatever the context is, whether you're designing a poster for a conference or whatever it is, within that, only you could do what you're doing, and so I mean the print cover in Milton's I Love New York More Than Ever, a good example because we had the same concept
Hmm.
basically, but the execution is very different.
Right.
And I've seen that before, where designers will have similar concepts, but they're so personal in a different way.
Right. Right. Yeah. And that's where it becomes personal expression.
Right.
Right. Getting back to the blood, sweat, and tears, the one thing that I noticed that was distinctly different about Blood, Sweat, and Tears from the home kit is the texture and the choice of letter forms. So like the type, you had a, you know, a very kind of industrial, technical typeface for the Blood, Sweat, and Tears, but
Right.
then you had handwritten
Yeah.
creative thinking.
Yeah.
So I and the background is has this paper
Yeah.
quality to it. Uh, can you? I think those little details make all the difference, and they really make me wonder, like, what was the reason for that? Like, why did you choose? So, why did you choose to do that?
Well, the handwriting goes right along with the crack, which is hand drawn too, you know. And so it's my handwriting, which is not a very pretty handwriting. I've never, Louise Feely has the most beautiful handwriting. I don't know if you're aware of it, but
No.
I look at her handwriting. It's like my mother, that generation, everyone had beautiful handwriting.
Hmm.
I write like a doctor, it's sometimes, and this is absolutely true. I can't even read what I wrote.
Yeah.
What did I, and so, but it's me. It's individually me. So that's the reason for the handwriting. It's the crack part. The texture actually came right out of the catalog because I scanned in the light bulb right out of the catalog, and so that's the texture blown up really big of the
So that
actual.
was that whole scan had so that much negative space around it.
I probably added. I don't remember. I probably added to it,
Okay.
but
Okay.
the texture was picked up right out of the catalog.
And so then I would assume then you chose what was that typeface? Is it like Futura or something very industrial, very
Trade
sounds
Gothic. I think I'm not sure. It's probably Trade Gothic.
okay. I would assume you chose that because it has very industrial kind of
Uh,
like, and it fits with the light bulb.
Yeah, I think I probably tried to come as close to the catalog
Right.
typeface as I could.
Well, what I find funny about that, like what I chuckle at in my mind when I see it, is that it's so industrial and so so neutral, emotionally so neutral. But we're talking about blood, sweat, and tears. Something so human and something, arguably, it's when you think of like, especially tears and blood, it's a vulnerable thing. But no, let's just stamp it with something really industrial.
That's a blues line, right? I got blood in my eyes.
Probably, I don't know.
Oh,
I'm not familiar with it, but yeah, yeah, actually it is. Now
yeah,
that's ringing a bell. That's ringing
yeah.
a So anyway, I mean, I guess what interests me with those posters is the amount of attention that goes into what I'd call the invisible, what people only like, that they feel it, but they don't think about it, you know?
Right,
Like it affects their sensibilities. It'll affect the way they feel about the work, but they'll never give it any thought.
right.
You know, it's kind of like this, and it's like the mortar between the bricks. It's like it has to be there, but nobody really pays attention to it. They're never like, oh, right, that's
Yep,
really important stuff.
yep. Now those posters hung on the stations in New Jersey Transit. They had to read really quickly too,
Uh-huh.
as people rode by. Not all of them, but some of them did.
Well, and I think they do, especially Blood, Sweat, and Tears. I think
Yeah.
that Home Kit, what I like about that one is that, first of all, the graphics for me just draw me into it. I'm an audience, I want to know the story. So I'll stand and I'll figure it out, like, because I'm willing to, I'm invested. Um, Blood, Sweat, and Tears, I think, has that immediate, like you're going by on the train, you're standing there waiting for the train,
Right.
got it. And
You know, now that we're talking about it too, I think part of the joke of the HomeKit for me was the term interactive, because it was early enough, you know, on the web and computer where that term was being used a lot.
all the time.
Yeah, and so I think it was my joke on that. It's like saying I saw somebody online and at the movie theater, or you know,
Right.
what does that mean? Uh, and so I think interactive was like a inside joke
Catchphrase.
for me. Yeah.
So how come you decided, so is that partly why you decided not to have any texture or anything like that on the HomeKit?
Well, it's more of an advertising takeoff, I guess, or
Okay.
instruction. You've done the same thing. You've done these faux, you know, kits
Oh
with
yeah, I
instruction.
love anything,
Yeah,
anything that has a pop culture quality to it. And I love make your own stuff, like
right.
cutting stuff out, building something,
Yeah,
the thought process that just goes into coming up with the way pieces should fit together.
yep.
I love that stuff.
Yeah, me too.
So
I,
so yeah.
I love miniatures. I've used like little railroad people in posters, and
Yes,
you know,
and we've done that with print covers. One in
right,
particular that I can think of,
right,
where you have soldiers, I believe it is.
right. Yeah,
Right,
yeah. There's something about that it's like mushrooms for your son. It's
right.
there's something about that I
Yeah,
love.
it just it triggers that obsessive thing.
Yeah.
So I know I didn't tell you that we were going to talk about this, but talking about that particular cover, which I'll show my students, that print cover where you have the photograph of those soldiers. How so? Like with that, where you come up with the idea, I assume you had a professional photographer
I did. Yeah.
do that. Um, Tell us a little bit about that process. So, like, how to first of all, how did you have the idea? How did you first get it down? How did you take that idea to, say, the editor at print? Like, how did that process go?
Um, I had actually been doing that with my friend Arnold Katz, who was a photographer. He's since passed, but we used to do quite a bit of setup photography where I would conceive of something and I'd have him photograph it.
Mhm.
And so it was one of my methods of working, um, and using miniatures and all that, or constructing something and having it photographed.
So,
Uh,
would you take the? Did you just describe it to him, or did you take? Did you draw it out, or what?
oh no, I actually set it up and had it photographed.
Yeah, but at first, didn't you have to? Didn't the idea have to, be approved by somebody first?
You know, I'm thinking back at print. I think, you know, I've been a really lucky guy.
No.
Uh, I've been given carte blanche probably more than any other designer, even when I worked for other people.
Huh.
And so even at Carroll Publishing, when I would give work out to you know, lots of other designers, I would keep for me what I knew I could do a really great job on, and just go ahead and do it. And for the most part, with very few exceptions, they would go through. And I think that was true at print too. I don't remember. I would share the work, uh, sort of after the fact, the same way I did the Thinking Creatively posters, or at least that's how I remember it. When I was freelancing for people I wasn't working with every day,
Mhm.
you know, and so you don't have that camaraderie. Uh, then I was being asked for a lot of revisions, and I hated it.
Yeah.
And in fact, that I gave up doing book covers, book jackets after however many years freelancing, because they were just asking, especially with the computer, they were just asking for too many revisions, and it
Yes.
wasn't fun anymore. And so, but I think, yeah, I don't remember there being a lot. I would even create the idea of the cover based on what I wanted to do on a story. Like it for print, I did the henna cover where it's henna painted on somebody's back. And that was a really minor story in in the magazine itself on henna. It wasn't what you would normally think of as a cover story, but I knew I wanted to do that. And I was able, I was given that freedom to do that. So I was able to create a cover based on something I wanted to explore.
Wow. Yeah, that is lucky. So I'm curious, so like, is there an environment that works best for you when you are in the process of coming up with ideas for a project? Is there, you know, somewhere where you go or anything like that? Is there any routine?
uh, well, let me back up for one moment because I, I don't think I'm giving completely the right picture. I will tell you doing books where I'm also given like carte blanche because I design them and write them. And that's what, they're, I have a contract with them to do. They're not hiring me, but
Right.
they do more often than not make a request about the cover or change the cover.
Mhm.
And so even though it's books that I mainly do, that happens more often than not. And I respect that because they have entire marketing departments behind them. And I can tell you that and they don't tell me what, well, sometimes they do say, here, use this cover. Like on um, the crime book, they wanted me to use that Jack Cole piece of art. It's a great cover in and of itself. And I think that I was able to work with it in a really exciting way. But uh, they do request changes there, and more often than not, they're right.
Mhm.
Cover gets better.
Mhm.
So I'm not resistant to that. I almost expect it with books because that's a higher price item than you know uh, doing a poster. So it's not always the case that I just get to do whatever I want.
Right. It's also interesting you should mention that sometimes it's valuable to have editors. Um,
Oh my God, yeah,
Especially with like book covers. When I think of like, there are plenty of times, and that's been my experience too with my graphic novels. Is I get to do what I want because I'm the one producing them, and I've
right,
never had anybody, no editor or anybody at the publishing house has ever complained about what I come up with.
right,
I can complain about it later. I can think there are several that are like, I wish somebody would have said, give me a couple more ideas or something.
right,
And when I did the Jack Kerouac wraparound cover, I mean, I was working with Penguin, so I came up with, I think, 5 different ideas. And the one they chose was not my favorite. I
right,
mean, I liked them all, but it wasn't my favorite. Now, when I look back on it, I think they made the right choice because my sensibilities have changed. My tastes have changed, and you have that period when you're working on a project when you're very emotionally volatile. I think you're really, really involved.
right.
Then you get some perspective after the project is over. So I think editors can be good.
No, editors, if they're a good editor, absolutely.
Yeah.
And with writing too,
Yes.
there's no one better than a good editor who makes you look smarter than you are.
Hmm.
I've had that experience.
Yeah. And isn't that kind of what a teacher is?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I often feel like that's kind of what I do.
yeah,
Edit.
yeah. No, it's true. Absolutely.
Right. So, what about, is there a process for you when you're first coming up with ideas, um, are there any rituals, any routines, anything that you habits?
Yeah, so there's two. One doesn't exist for me anymore. Um, but mainly what I do is I stop thinking about it, and then the ideas come to me in the shower,
Huh.
or when I lived in New Jersey, which is now about 7 years ago. I don't know why, but when I would leave the development where I lived, suburban development, there was a hill, and all my ideas would come to me when I went down that hill.
Really?
Yeah, I don't know why.
So did
So
it kind of become a superstition?
it just kept happening.
Huh?
And I'd like go, oh man, there you go.
It was like your lucky rabbit's foot.
I guess. And so I haven't had that for 7 years. Showers, yes. Um, and some occasionally dreams. I have
Really?
time solutions. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Um, that's rarer. Um, but I think the trick is not to labor over it,
Okay.
not to stress, not to drive yourself crazy. If anything, just sort of let your mind open up and not think about it, and then it happens.
Okay. So sort of let it go.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay. That's great. Because this isn't like math. It's
right,
not like a mathematical equation. It's
right.
I don't know. Okay. So how did you learn about conceptual thinking? Like, do you remember, was it on the job? Was it in a classroom? Through other, the work you saw around you? Where did you learn how to do that?
Well, I think looking at work and being around work for most of my life, design.
Mhm.
Um, but I became aware that I was really good at it in school. When I went back to school for undergrad, the instructors would tell me, either they say you're really good conceptually, or they say your work is really different.
Mhm.
There's something very different about your work. And uh, at first I didn't know what they meant by that. And so I began to sort of examine, like, what is everybody else doing? What am I doing? And I realized that there was an idea behind everything I was doing, even and also a sense of rebelliousness. And so I would always rebel against whatever the assignment, not always, but I would rebel against what the assignment was
Mhm.
if I thought it was
Yeah,
fun enough
it's
to
so
do
hard to imagine from you, Stephen.
so. uh, and so I just saw that in my crit today with some of the students, like one in particular, and I could tell he was rebelling against what the assignment is,
Uh-huh.
and and it was going to be very successful, and I was amused by that.
You saw, so it all came back.
Yeah.
Came full circle. Oh, that's interesting. Um, okay. So hold on a second. I had a thought that that you mentioned there that I wanted to address, but it slipped my mind. Maybe it'll come back to me. And I can edit that somehow to make it chronological. Um, oh, so no, here's what I was wanted to mention. So I went to, you know, supposedly some really great art colleges, and nobody ever talked about conceptual thinking.
Oh my God.
It was not, I learned on the job. I learned in an at an ad agency. And I'm really just talking to you here. I'm going to edit this out, but um like I just can't believe that. Like I
That's
am a big reason why I'm interested in doing these interviews with creatives out there working professionals is because I want to know like what they think of it, where they learned it, just their experience.
right.
If it hadn't been for I think Brian Cronin, who in the early 2000s I just thought was the most kick-ass conceptual thinker I could find.
Right.
Um, I don't know if I would have ever quite, you know, but once I figured out what it was, um, like it was an addiction. Like I
Yeah.
still, if I had the time, you know, I wish I could still like do New York Times op-ed pieces, but the turnaround is just insane on those. There's no
Oh,
way.
no, it's
The
insane.
pay stinks,
Yeah.
but I would do it for the crappy pay if I had the time, just, you know, once a month.
Yeah.
It was such a great education. Like it
Yeah.
was such a great, there was something unique about that kind of experience that just like it, I don't know. I don't know how to describe it. It was just an amazing creative experience.
It's amazing you weren't taught that in school.
I know.
That's bizarre. I mean, that's the main thing I teach. I mean, I teach how to design, uh, all that, but I always lead with concept, and it's always about concept for me.
When you're teaching about design, when you say that, do you mean you're teaching how to work with visual images and text?
Yeah, how to use, type and how
Right.
to lay out a page, and, because I teach juniors in design. Illustration, I'm just really teaching concept.
Right.
We just did, the assignment was to do the op-ed page, to do an op-ed piece.
Hmm.
And now they're doing either a New Yorker cover or a Time magazine cover.
I it'd be interesting to see what they come up with.
Yeah.
Is there a theme that you're basing either the Time or the New Yorker cover on? Like, are they?
The time, like the op-ed I assigned, there were 4 stories. They had to pick one
Mhm.
as a cover story. New Yorker, I gave them the option to do whatever they want, because that's really what New Yorker covers are,
Mhm.
but still pushing them to have some kind of concept or commentary, about why would this appear in the New Yorker now
Right.
in 2021. And the one who rebelled did, he did like this alley with graffiti and garbage bags everywhere, and a garbage bin, and uh, uh, just the opposite of what you usually see on a New Yorker
Yeah.
cover.
Yeah.
I thought it was really funny.
It'd be nice to see something like that on a New Yorker cover.
Yeah.
Incidentally, do you know how to, so like, how does the New Yorker cover thing work? Can just anybody submit some ideas, or do you
I
have
think so. Yeah, I think so.
Hmm.
I just saw Anita Coons had a sketch that she just said was rejected, dealing with Texas and the whole abortion issue.
Uh-huh.
Um, and so I think she just sketched it out and
Sent it in.
sent it in. Yeah,
Wow. I like that. If it's that egalitarian,
I think
that's
it is. Yeah.
wonderful. Um, okay, so incidentally, before I forget this, I want to use this assignment you described where you have students come up with 100 visual cliches. I
Right.
probably won't have them do 100, but because I think that's college level. But what do you do after that? Like, is there a follow-up to that?
Yeah. So there's, in illustration, it's the op-ed piece. So I show them um, work like your work, or Peter Zierlein, or Igor Kopelnitsky. Uh,
He's one of the greats.
yeah, one of the greats. Yeah, I haven't heard from him in years. I hope he's doing okay.
I think, didn't he go into fine arts? I
Oh,
thought
I
he
don't know.
he was going to go into gallery stuff.
Yeah,
Like like John Rosen. John Rosen.
yeah.
Is it John?
Jeff,
Jeff Rosen.
Jeff
Um,
Rose.
he was everywhere for a while. It's phenomenal work. And then you just don't see him. I went to his website not long ago, and he's doing films and all
Oh,
kinds.
really? Nice.
But I think it's all. My sense is that it's not client driven. He's just
Right.
following you.
That's great. Stephen Savage is another one who sort of went into fine arts.
Yeah.
Um, and so it's for op-ed, it's a matter of taking two visual cliches and combining them in a new and interesting way
Mhm.
that
So,
conveys the message.
so first you have them come up with visual cliches,
Right,
and then you introduce them to the idea of you take two of the ideas you came up with,
right,
make that interesting.
right. And
That is
in
stellar.
design, I give the same assignment, but then they have to do a logo, and I give them four logos. One is the Good Diner, the other is Air Train, the Academy of Achievement, and I'm blanking on what the fourth. Oh, Curious Pictures, which is a film, a creative film agency or a studio in Manhattan. And
Mhm.
all four of those are actually done by Pentagram, but of course I don't tell them that.
Right.
And I ask them to combine. So the actual Good Diner, I don't know if you've ever seen that, but it's a coffee cup with a halo
I
over it
haven't seen it. No.
by Woody Purtle. So it's the perfect example of combining two images. But
Okay.
they hit upon really good ones as well.
I'm going to use that. Um,
Absolutely.
so there was another question that I really wanted to ask you. Oh, there was a designer that you said when you guys came to Baltimore, you visited.
Oh,
Who
um,
was it? Because I looked up their website and I was just floored. The work was incredible, but I did not. It didn't sink in. I've forgotten who it was.
yeah, it's David Plunkett, and it's
Plunkert or Clunkert?
With a P, Plunkert,
Okay,
and it's Spur Design with two R's.
that's it.
It's he
Spur.
and his it's he and his wife, but he does most of the poster work. She does children's books. His work is the perfect example of what we're talking about. He's amazing.
He's somebody I've thought about just reaching out to, as just like somebody. Hey, I'm a new creative in town. Love your stuff. Want to get together for
Sure.
coffee or something.
Yeah, they're great. Um, you definitely should do that.
Okay. All right.
He's
So a couple more questions though.
okay, sure.
Okay. So okay, we asked that one. So, who is one of your favorite conceptual thinkers in design or illustration? Is there anybody that you can think of that's like that they consistently produce phenomenal work?
Do you know who I'm going to say?
I would assume Glazer.
And so this might surprise you, but it's actually Seymour.
I see that actually. Yeah.
It's Seymour Quast. I think that the difference between Milton and Seymour is that Seymour's funny,
That is interesting. Okay.
and Milton's very cerebral. And obviously he was brilliant. There's no question about that. But I respond to humor, and Seymour's just so he's been funny for like 60 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, back in the
Pushpin,
day,
you could go so far. I mean, all of Pushpin, they consistently produced. I would even say that they were kind of like, I don't know if they were the grandfathers of conceptual thinking or not, but like they gave it a whole new, they brought it to a higher level.
yeah, I think absolutely true.
I don't see a lot of it. Well, Paul Rand, um, but it seems like once they started really gaining traction in the 60s, they were just like on fire.
Well, they also, introduced the whole postmodern thing. And so they were able to do parodies. Like Paul Rand would never do a parody of, a piece of art before him, where Milton did that many times, right?
Yeah.
And and Seymour as well. It just opened up a whole world because they didn't care.
Yeah.
It wasn't like they sat down together and said, we're going to invent postmodernism. They just, you were taught not to use historical reference in school. That's what they were taught. And they just said, screw that. They
Right.
just had a ball. They were just having fun. But Seymour continues to just make me laugh out loud with his concepts.
Well, so one piece by Seymour Quast that my students are familiar with, and I think is one of my favorite conceptual thinking pieces, but also where that humor is, and I guess it's arguable. You can tell me if you think there's humor behind it, but his Vietnam protest poster and Bad Breath, just how does bad breath have anything to do with war? But he figured it out, and it's
It's so funny. It's so
war is never
smart.
mentioned in the tag. The only evidence of war is what you see in the mouth.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
Yeah, that's
It's
like
brilliant.
when you think
Absolutely.
of protest art, you do not necessarily think of, you don't at all think of what somebody's breath might smell like.
Right. Yep.
But anyway, okay, so Seymour Quast, that's wonderful. Um, okay, do you have any? Okay, this is the last question was, do you have any project ideas? But you already gave me one, so
Right. Great.
okay, so we can sign off. If I do have one I'd like to ask if so. I'm teaching a graphic novel class as well, and I'm wondering if you'd ever be willing to talk about like Mort Meskin or actually anybody you really love in comics.
Sure. Absolutely. So there's three. There's Jack Kirby,
Mhm.
Steve
That would be
Ditko,
great.
and Mort Meskin.
Who was the second one?
Steve Ditko.
Steve Ditko.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so yeah, I'd love to talk about them.
Okay. All three of them, but I think Kirby would be great. And Ditko. Um, they worked to. They had a weird. We could talk about them together.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It was actually they both worked for him with Stan Lee,
Right.
so we could actually kind of talk about Ditko, Kirby, and the Antichrist.
Yeah. Yeah. You were cracking me up, man, with that whole thing. That was so damn funny. You just yanking
I'm
my.
glad you took it well because
Oh, it was so funny.
so I did that. So you know how they talk about how like if you use like you got to be very careful of how you use social media. So I was friends with this person on Facebook, and they were a radio disc jockey, and they were also a musician, and they had like really esoteric tastes in music, which was great. But they
Right.
would go off on these tirades about like I remember one was like anybody who is famous is any famous musician has no talent at all. Like and he was serious because he's very
Right.
passionate about it, just like
Right.
you are about Kirby or about Stan Lee.
Right.
And so I just remember typing in, what about Stevie Wonder? And I was just started to name some like really famous, but inarguably very talented musicians.
Yeah.
And he unfriended me. He
Oh
started
my
talking
God.
trash about me around town. Like suddenly everybody knew that this disc jockey hated me. And it was all because of that. Like,
That's hilarious.
isn't that? I mean, talk about a backfire, right?
And what a strange opinion to have. Yeah.
Well, I think I kind of get it. I've known a lot of people who are really passionate about certain things. You know who it is? Like that guy who thinks that there's nothing that the fine arts can offer, nothing that comics can't or superhero comics can't. Who was that student? Do you remember?
Arlen.
Arlen, right?
Arlen Schumer.
Right. I mean,
Yeah.
what? And he's clearly very passionate about comics and all that stuff.
Right.
But that sort of zealotry can lead people to dangerous places.
Yeah. 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 And I still see him on Facebook. He's always arguing with everyone.
I don't even go on Facebook anymore.
Yeah.
That's another weird thing is like I've just kind of lost my interest in social media
Right.
altogether.
I think a lot of people have. Yeah.
But I mean, from the point of view of just like Instagram, I should be at least posting stuff for the McQueen book. I just have no interest in.
Right.
It's just you get to, for me it's like I'm at a place with it where I'm not really interested in what other people think about it.
Right.
And that's the best I can, and that's the best I can describe it. But that's absurd to say because, of course I'm interested in what other people think about it. Why
Right.
would I want to publish it if I wasn't interested?
Right.
But,
Right.
just that sort of need for that immediate gratification or showing off what I've most recently done just doesn't seem to sit with me like it used to.
I understand. Yep.
Anyway, Stephen, thank you so much for taking the time today. My
Oh,
students are going
absolutely.
to be so thrilled.
It's great to see you, man.
Yeah, you too. And also, please remember to send the creative thinking poster that was screen printed you were telling me about.
Right. I forgot you had Ray, right? You had him.
I did have Ray.
Yeah. So,
Yeah,
so you know who I'm talking about.
I do.
That's the funniest damn thing.
Where could I access all 7 of the ones you did?
I'll send them to you.
Because it would be a great thing to just like show how many different ways you could look at the same thing.
Do you mind if they're low res?
Not at all.
Oh, then I'll send them to you as soon as we get off.
Okay, thanks. That sounds great.
Okay, man.
You can just put them in the book that you send me. Please do get that off to me when you get a chance.
I am. I
I'll
promise.
pay for it. I'll pay for it.
No, 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 not at all.
I'm not even asking for wholesale. All right, take it easy, man.
Great to see you.
You
Take care.
too.
Bye.